What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Antoine Malone, and this is a place where you can have candid Christian conversation in a safe way. Today, we are tackling another video on critical race theory because it's critical race theory everywhere. And so, I do a lot of videos. I've done a lot of videos so far on critical race theory. I got a few more that I want to do, but today we're going to talk about 5 things that troubles me about critical race theory. And that's going to surprise some of you because some of you may think that I'm sort of a critical race theory apologist, which I'm not. I do believe there's some good things that we can get out of CRT, and just from an intellectual integrity point of view, I want to talk about critical race theory in the space where it wants to have the conversation and not have it bleed over into places where it doesn't intend to contribute any ideas, particularly in religion and even in economics, which is where we're getting most of the feedback from critical race theory. But today I'm just going to look at 5 things that I particularly find troubling and things I can't get behind necessarily about critical race theory, and I wanted to share them with you. So 5 things very quickly. If you, first of all, before we get into that, if you haven't liked this page or subscribed to this page, I hope you do that. I hope you subscribe to the page. The idea is for us to be able to have conversations in a safe way here, candid Christian conversations in a safe way. If you're interested in doing that, then cool, let's have the conversation. You guys can tell me some of the things that you struggle with critical race theory in the comment section below, or speak to some of the things that I'm talking about. But subscribe to the channel and let's be a part of creating this community where we can have safe conversations together. All right, number 1, the first thing that I find troubling about critical race theory is the idea that racism is the primary agent of injustice. And here's, first of all, let's set the space right. A lot of people, when they're thinking that critical race theory, they're applying critical race theory too broadly. When they read that racism is the starting place for injustices, they're thinking that's injustices everywhere, anywhere, all the time, across humanity, so forth and so on. I don't believe that's what critical race theory is speaking to. Very specifically, critical race theory is looking at the legal system, the legislative practices and the legislative laws and the processes that are in place in society. And it's saying that if there's an injustice that shows up in the laws, and if there's an injustice that shows up in the processes systemically, that the core reason for those injustices is racism. That racism is the first domino of injustices in the legislative process and products of American history, past and present. The reason this is troubling is because I think we should always be careful to use terms, even though I just said it, we need to be careful using terms like always and never, because those make absolutes. And sometimes I do believe that there's such a thing as absolute truth, but I think an accusation like racism is the primary agent of injustice is like saying racism is always the primary agent of injustice. And I don't believe that is exactly true. I think there's many potential reasons why injustices can show up in legal, in laws, and in various dynamics associated with our legislation and many of our processes. Racism is one of many. I would say that racism is a very common one in America, and I would certainly say that in our past, racism certainly appeared to be one of, if not the primary agent historically. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that all injustices that show up in the legislative arena or in the system are the product of racism. I would say that racism is regular enough that when we do see these injustices, we should take a look at them to make sure that racism is not present there, right? And so it's prevalent enough that it warrants our attention when we notice injustices, but I'm not ready to say that all injustices are the product of racism. And I think that that's too far a stretch for CRT, and it could create some problems to solving what those real injustices are if we mislabel them. Number two, the second thing that troubles me about critical race theory is the idea that white people can not do any good thing. And this is born out of the interest convergence tenet that says that basically that the interests of white people and the interests of those in minorities or those marginalized voices need to converge in order for white people to do anything about it. In other words, white people must benefit from a decision in order for them to make that decision. And what that does is it robs white people of any ability to be sacrificial or to give away something for the greater good. Now, again, I want to make sure that what we're not talking about here is across the board, all things everywhere, all the time. We're not talking about the human behavior necessarily of white people in every space of society. Again, critical race theory is looking very specifically at the legislative arena and laws and processes. So what it's saying is that white people will not want to get behind laws and processes that take something from them, that they won't want to support a law or a process that will help someone else, help the marginalized, and hurt themselves. Now, the reason I find this troubling is that, again, it's a sweeping statement. It's suggesting that there's an inability for white people to act sacrificially, and I just think that's an overreach of a statement. Now, is it? And we'll talk about this in the video where I say 5 things that I can get on board with CRT. Have we seen modern day and past plenty of examples where white people, socially constructed, if you will, white people will not be interested in laws or processes that take something from them in the name of helping someone else? Yes. In fact, that's the very problem that we're having with socialism. And when that happens, typically, whether it's resources or rights or whatever, it ends up, this is when socialism comes up and Marxism and all of these sorts of things. And so we've seen plenty of example of that. And I would say we've seen so much of an example of that's an expected thing to see. And we'll talk about that more in another video. But I'm not ready to say that there's an incapability or an inability for white people to act sacrificially. I think that's too far of a stretch. Troubling thing number 3 about CRT for me is, and again, these are in no particular order, is the concept of centering experiences and stories. I believe that the warnings about centering stories and experiences can be dangerous. It can be dangerous, and here's the reason why I say this. Number one, I don't hear me say that we should not hear the experiences and stories of marginalized peoples in order to understand fully what it means to understand fully the racial plight, if you will, of our country, again, past and present. So those experiences are important. I would even say that those experiences are vital to our understanding, right? So I'm not saying we shouldn't have those, but the idea of centering them, if we decide to do that, and there's a lot of language around this word centering, what that centering does is sometimes it can create a situation where the story overrides all the rest of the facts that we know. And this is what we see in a court case. If you get someone up and you get a witness, the idea is that you take the witness, you hear the story, but then you juxtapose that story with the other witnesses and the data that you get, and you put them all context together, right? And you may have a star witness who can really, really bring it, right? But for the most part, you're kind of collecting these evidences and you're putting together pieces of a puzzle, right? And stories are part of the pieces in the puzzle, but they aren't the whole puzzle. And so I don't think that CRT is saying it's the whole puzzle, but I do worry about the centering of experience. So I'll give you one last example. I wrote this in a book. I think about the story of Malcolm X, and Malcolm X went through a big transformation journey. He was like a thug and a crime ring leader, and he did all these criminal things when he was younger. He had an experience in jail with someone who brought him to the Islam faith, and he even had a transformation, completely changes his life, does something different. He stands up, he gives a testimony about, hey, I once was this, but now because of Islam, I am this. And those things are true in his life and his story and all of that. And yet, if he were to ask me if the religion of Islam is true, I would say no, Christianity is what is true, right? Even in the face of hearing his story and his experience, right? So his story and experience does give weight to what he's trying to communicate, perhaps about his religion and what have you, but it's not the whole thing, because if it were the whole thing, then I would have to walk away from Christianity, which of course I'm not going to do, right? So stories and experiences contribute something, and there could be something wrong in even the stories and experiences, but we don't want to alleviate them altogether, right? So we got to be careful about centering experiences and stories in the conversation around race. With that, we need to apply the proper weight and allow it to inform our collective conclusions, but not completely inform them to the detriment and the exclusion of the other things that would weigh in. Okay. All right. Number 4, the fourth thing that troubles me a little bit about CRT is generally the conversation around CRT. Basically, critical race theory is being thrown into two extreme camps. Now, I find it, and it may be just because I'm a black person who's trying to push for social justice and racial justice from a Christian point of view, I find a lot of opposition, and I am experiencing a lot of what I would say is the extreme opposition to critical race theory. And that is the idea that anyone who adopts any aspect of critical race theory believes all white people are racist, believes that original sin is racism, that is anti-God, anti-Christ, wants to be Marxist, and all of these things, right? These what I would call extreme points of view where it pertains to critical race theory. But on the other side of that sort of extreme pendulum, you have people who do believe those things, who believe that all white people are negative and have misunderstood critical race theory from that point of view, and have weaponized it in the conversation of racism. I just don't see as many people weaponizing critical race theory against white people, in the sense that they're saying, hey, we think all white people are racist and all that. Most people see critical race theory as a way to understand history and to fulfill or to fill in most the historical story from a racial point of view. And they see it as a way to provide pathway to deal with the issues that we face, like our default behaviors, right? But regardless, the conversation is on two extremes. One person is saying, hey, critical race theory, if you say anything about race relationships, if it's a bad thing, if you think you see racism somewhere, automatically you're a critical race theorist. Critical race theory is like a section of the racial conversation, a small section at that. It's the legal section and some of the sociological, psychological aspects of our society. But those things are tied to laws and why we make laws and so forth and so on, right? It's just a section of the conversation. It's not the whole conversation altogether. It matters because laws matter. Laws are what create a society. Laws are what create a civilization, right? And so it does have, it's weighty. And so it's a major piece in the sense that it has large impact. But as far as how we talk about and what we're talking about when it comes to race, it's not the entire conversation. And when someone says something about racism, they're not necessarily saying something that is promotive or influenced, perhaps even by CRT. And there are those who are going to shut down any conversation around racial justice by calling it critical race theory, and that's extreme. So I hate the conversation around critical race theory it is not leading to solutions, because we're all arguing about things that critical race theory is and isn't really saying. Rather, not is saying. We're arguing about things that it isn't saying in these extreme camps. I'll say this last thing: every camp is responsible for their own extremists. And so, if you are, let's say you're a white person and you notice that there are people in your sort of camp, if you will, who are taking CRT to the extreme, it really is your responsibility to deal with your own extremists, because those who are on the other side can't deal with your extremists. You got to deal with your extremists. And the same thing has to be said for, say, the black camp, if you will. We can't allow people to take it and overuse it as well. Every camp is responsible for their own extremists. If we really want to get solutions, I'm afraid that maybe some of us don't really want solutions, but that's a whole nother conversation. The last thing, the fifth troubling thing about CRT is this, and that is a lack of clear solutions. I'm not sure that critical race theory provides us super clear solutions. I think it does a decent job at laying out the problems, or gives a template for problems that I can look at, tweak a little bit, but is true in a lot of ways. And but what it doesn't do is give us clear solutions. And in reality, the solutions as a believer is going to be a change of heart, and it's going to be believers, Christ, living in and through his people, and therefore changing how they behave, what things they vote for, what laws they put into place because of that changed heart. So you're going to see both of those things from a Christian point of view, right? And not just are you going to have a changed heart, but that changed heart is going to change how you live, how you do, what you interface with. And that means that laws will look different for those who love Christ properly versus those who do not, right? And so that's the real solution to the problem. Critical race theory doesn't provide that solution. It does, or at least doesn't provide any clear pathways. So those are 5 things that I think about critical race theory that trouble me. And there's a few others, but we just chose 5. Tell me below what you find troubling about critical race theory. Do so in a respectful way and in an with intellectual integrity. Understand that critical race theory is not speaking to the problem of man and the problem of sin. Is looking at the very specific arena of legislation and looking at how legislation creates just laws and unjust laws. It proposes that race is the primary reason that unjust laws exist, and then gives some tenets for why that is. If you have problems with that particular idea, go and put some comments below. I'm looking forward to connect with you. If you haven't liked and subscribed to the channel, do so, and I will see you when I see you. God loves you, and so do I. Have a wonderful day.